Hello YouTubers, this is the noobifier. Kyle and I just returned from a QSS35 install which was in Massachusetts. The QSS35 is special because it's a 6-degree freedom extreme envelope motion platform, which you will see is absolutely perfect for this application. We got to spend some time with Jeff Anton, a pro stock car driver who lately has been competing in the ARCA series. With a quick search, you're going to see that Jeff has a lot of experience first on bikes and then taking over Anton Racing in the Nascar series. After 13 years of racing retirement, Jeff decided to come back and race ARCA at Lime Rock Park and Sonoma Raceway in 2025, finishing with 2 top 10s. So based on that, Jeff is getting ready for the 2026 season, having decided to compete in all of the 4 road race courses in the ARCA series. Racing is expensive, and Jeff was saying that if his team is able to find sponsorship, there are some circle tracks and even some Craftsman truck series on the menu. If you're interested in speaking with Jeff about the 2026 season, please message me. Back on to topic. Jeff had been researching motion systems and had come across a video review and then decided to reach out by email. This is the best way to make sure that we're able to get you into the right system. Jeff was very interested in Sim as a training tool. I don't want to get too far into the story, but Jeff is the first person I've ever seen who got in his system for the first time and threw down some crazy lap times one after the other. As I said, in the fall we received an email which led to a quick call with the goal to figure out how to get Jeff into the best system that he needed. You might think we would always just suggest the biggest and most powerful system that a person could afford, but no, we actually won't do that because there's often a sweet spot, and that is likely to be the CH2 or even the S25. After realizing how physically close he was, it seemed that Jeff might be able to take me up on my offer to come in person to the studio and test for a day. I built the studio with this in mind, and we always offer this, especially when we're discussing some of the more extreme systems. Jeff was seeking a system that would be able to recreate all of the forces he receives on the track. Physical feedback was his priority, and he explained that his current static system he had been using was effectively plateauing his skill. We discussed the 5 DOF based CH2, the V20, the QSS25, and he had seen the QSS35 video. One thing I mentioned in that video was that you do get sustained G-forces due to a very large operating envelope. Any system can give you little bursts of inertia, but to get a consistent lateral loading, we need to have banking in the roll axis and tilting in the pitch axis. Pitch and roll at 45 degrees will simulate 1/2 of a sustained G in that direction. And because the screens are attached and move with the driver will focus past the screen to the next apex, and the occupant will begin to ignore the room that they're in. Jeff would be able to get what he was looking for, something unique to the QSS35, which is actually sustained loading and unloading. Jeff called again to let me know that he would be unable to come visit in person. At that time, Jeff was still choosing between the 5 DOF CH2 system and the 6 DOF QSS35. During the discussion, we min-maxed the pros and cons, and I suppose there might have been a little bit of FOMO at work. Jeff finally decided that he wouldn't risk not committing to the more capable system. The system was ordered, and after production, it was being shipped to Jeff. We addressed the unique needs of a QSS35, which is a 240 volt power and a stable location to operate from. He was planning to have it in his garage, which aside from some usual dust, would be the ideal location. Safely installed in a corner away from the machine shop, access to the garage door, and a level cement floor meant that it could be delivered mostly assembled. We calculated that it was only a 6-hour drive, so this would be the first time that Kyle and I did not need to fly. Because we no longer had any baggage restrictions, we had a chance to build Jeff's PC, and he was able to source some Samsung G8s on a Black Friday price. The PC would need to be beefy. Triple 4K is no joke. The screens were 240Hz 4K OLED. Graphics would need to be 5090 and an AMD 9800X liquid-cooled, 1200 watt power supply, 64 gigs of RAM, a system and a game SSD all within a Corsair case. In my shop, I fabricated and packed up some extras such as a place to mount a trackball and a place to mount a keyboard. We prepared a custom seat mount slider just in case, with some spares and some tools. After the system cleared customs and it was delivered, Kyle and I left at 10 a.m. on Friday, arriving at 6 p.m. that night. Because Jeff has a 1-mile-long driveway up a mountain, he was able to meet the delivery truck at the road with his own telehandler. They opened up the crate and had the system on its wheels ready for us when we arrived. Kyle knew that a main focus would be to get the seat mounting perfect. Jeff showed us some seat options that he had, but we decided to take his actual fitted seat directly out of one of his cars. Kyle measured the actual car and noted how far the wheel was, the shifter was, and the pedals were from the driver. We saw that Jeff sits very close to the wheel. The shifter is mounted high, and the seat bucket is basically tilted onto a substantial angle. I don't have the actual number for you, but it's tilted. We spent the whole day driving, but we didn't want to leave for the night until we could fire up the system so that the PC was connected to a single screen. The system was plugged into the brand new 240 volt plug that Jeff had installed that week. The system came to life and we put it through its range at only 10% because it was still up on its casters and didn't want it to yeet itself across the floor. At 9 p.m. we stopped for the night, back up at 7 for breakfast, and then at the shop for 8 o'clock. Kyle immediately continued to complete the seat mount while I began mounting and aligning the screens. Jeff's system is practically a carbon copy of my own, so I was able to anticipate the length and the types of wires that he needed. There were 3 bricks that were two-way taped and then zap strapped tight neatly behind the covers. DisplayPort and the G8 power wires at 10 feet of length are all consolidated to one side within a conduit. And of course that conduit had enough relief so that it could move without damaging or catching on something. The power for the BT1, the wheelbase, and pedals are all tucked up below the platform. Kyle was able to get a much better driver's position by inverting the SimMagic Alpha wheelbase, allowing for maximum leg clearance, which is something that I'm going to do to my own system. And this allows Jeff to put an AIM data logger or an ECU master display up there in the future. It was a no-fail goal to get his system lowered into place and operating before the evening so that Jeff could begin testing and make suggestions on how we might tune and adjust. I usually take the initial test drive to do bindings and get the basics done. I love to drive and I would like to think that I can hold my own. I would say that Kyle is probably the best wheelman that I know both in real life and in sim, but when we get Jeff in his system for the first time, all of that was redefined. I'm going to try to unpack what happened next. There are 2 ways of looking at this. The first observation would be that Jeff drives the car at such a level that to a bystander, it seems like the car is out or about to be out of control. If I try to drive like that, I don't have the skill to keep it together and I crash or spin out and crash. Watching Jeff drive his sim was a unique opportunity because normally I can't just stand in the car and observe him at work. He brakes much later and exits turns with more velocity preserved than I thought possible. He carried momentum and accelerated in places successfully where I would not, and as I said, I would spin out. The S35 is exactly the correct simulator for Jeff to train in. The second thing that I observed is the counterpoint to the first. It became clear to me that this motion system was able to provide Jeff with a more true-to-life feeling that allowed him to drive closer to the limit. As soon as he had done 2 laps, he pulled over, and then we were into that pit chief and driver mode. He would explain what he was feeling and then what he wanted it to feel like. Too much pitch under braking, and it needed a lot more sharpness in the roll. We showed him how to make these changes, and he did more laps. We repeated this over and over again, isolating behavior that he wanted to adjust by turning it off in the software and then reactivating it with a new setting to confirm that it was tuned properly. Test, adjust, repeat over and over again. Later I could see in his face that we were getting much closer to how a real car feels. He was looking past the screens to the next apex. He had stopped blinking as much and the lap times kept dropping. Will I apply his profile to my system when it's done? Of course. It would be crazy to not run his tune. The closest thing that I will ever get to driving his car would be to take the changes that he's made to the profile and running them on my own system. I need to experience this because despite many of his sliders being set to 120 or 130% and being a very rough ride, for me it has to be more than real. I understand that his profile will seem more real than what I've been running, and it would be a better sim. We called it that night and went out for supper. Back up for 8:30 on Sunday, we set to work on the details. Cable management, iRacing had downloaded that evening, so I got to initializing that and we'd started to test that. With everything bound, we went through a similar process for that game, and Jeff had explained an issue that he was thinking about. It took him a very short time to identify what he wanted us to work on next. In videos, I always say that motion sim isn't about moving you in the direction that you're moving, but it's about making you feel the motion and movement that you are moving, if that makes any sense. This means that if you're turning around the corner, the system twisting isn't helping seal the deal as much as if the system banked over to apply pressure onto your side. Turning right smushes the driver against the left side of the seat. Traction loss and vertical loading were okay, but we discussed some changes, I took some notes, and I have plans to link Jeff up with the head programmer over at Cubic. Perhaps we will be able to get these final details recoded for him in a custom profile, which would improve his training value even more. We spent a bunch of time talking about racing, building fast cars, and I even managed to score my own stock car seat, which I will mount in my S35. I have a feeling that I'm going to need it if I start using Jeff's settings. Jeff and I are going to challenge each other on the leaderboard where he sets a time and I try to beat it. We shook hands and said goodbye. Kyle and I hit the road at noon to return to Ottawa. The forecast had a snowstorm hitting exactly where we were, but we made it home safely. The next day, Jeff messaged to say that he had spent more time dialing in the profile, plus he had his friends over to take turns at driving this new addition to his garage. A sick addition. I think of all the systems we've done, that his is likely to get the most hours put on it of any installs or even my own system. Kyle and I were happy to make this happen, and we had such a great time with Jeff in his shop. So that's it. Another sim install for you to enjoy, more things learned, and a better way for Jeff to get the most out of his off season. If you want information about his profile, or if you're interested in a visit to the shop to test for the day, reach out to us by email with the information linked within the description. Thank you very much for spending your time with me. Drive at the limit and never lift.